Hello and welcome to Fantasy View, a podcast for reviews of fantasy novels. I'm Jason Hubbard. People, I have a confession to make. Please bear with me because this isn't going to be easy for me, but there's just something I really need to get off my chest. So, again, please bear with me. I sometimes wet the bed. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, sometimes I still wet the bed. Not all the time, just sometimes. 2-3 times a year. That's a pretty good record, right? Yeah. Okay, all right. That's not what I want to confess. I just made it up. It's not even true. Really, you have to believe me. Okay, what I really want to confess is that this next book I'm going to review, I don't like it. Not very much. Okay, that's not much of a confession. Okay, what I want to say is, one day I was at a bookstore that I think it was called Booksellers or something like that. It's been closed for business for years now, which is really too bad. I was in the fantasy section, of course, looking for anything unusual, anything I wouldn't normally read. One of the titles I picked out was The Shadow Queen by Anne Bishop. I got it not only because it was something I usually wouldn't get, but also because the cover had an illustration of an attractive woman. Scandalous, I know! Imagine me getting suckered in by a pretty face. What will I do next? Start seeing romance flicks? Well, this book taught me a lesson. Not all fantasy books are about epic journeys and sword and magic fighting. That might seem obvious to some people, but I didn't suspect that some fantasy novels were like dramas that are kind of like Gone with the Wind. These stories are not what I normally read. I prefer stories with big action and adventure, but I believe I'm able to review a drama story based on its own merits. So I picked up The Shadow Queen, believing this might be a type of romance story of the John and Marcia ilk. I expected a few titillating scenes that I was used to reading in books from another series, and perhaps a sappy yet satisfying ending. What I got was actually a story that seems to run on male guilt. Now, what is male guilt? Why, it's the feeling of being guilty for being a male, for having feelings and urges that come with being a male, for seeing the terrible things other males do in response to those urges. I know, this is quite a damning accusation, and it's not one I make lightly. But I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable reading this thing, and I hope you'll understand why soon enough. First of all, I have to say that the beginning of the story left me plenty confused despite the prologue that gives some of the background story. I guess the fault is mostly mine, since this is the 7th installment in the Black Jewel series. I knew it was only the latest installment in the series when I got it, so go ahead and wag a finger at me and say that I should have known better. But hell, this wasn't the first time I picked up on a series starting in the middle, and I'm sure it won't be the last. Anyway, the story starts with Theron Greyhaven, a man who is wary of war and is now about to live in his family's estate, which he just inherited, which is called Greyhaven, in a place called Dina Nahel. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. Now, one might assume that Theron was going to be the leader of this place. Not necessarily of the town, but of the estate at least. He's the latest in the line of Greyhavens, and he has many people, most of them war buddies, to help him. Instead, Theron says, "We need a queen! We need a queen!" I mean, holy hell! I know the book is called The Shadow Queen, but this just comes right out of the blue. Theron could be the ruler, but he says that Dina Nahel needs a queen to rule the land instead, as if this is the most obvious thing in the world. Which begs the questions, why a queen and not a king? Are the people in this fantasy world really so unusual? And what does a queen do exactly? Are the people like ants and bees? If so, does that mean... Well, no, it doesn't mean that. And thank God for that, because the last thing I want to read about is a human woman giving birth to 20 or 30 babies all at one time. At least, I don't want to read that in a book. I have the internet for that. Theron needs a queen, so he and some of his men go see some other men who are called warlords. They sound like such nice, humble folks. Theron asks if these warlords have queens who could come on over and rule Dina Nihel. So, yes, Theron is basically shopping at Queens R Us. One of his men say Dina Nihel already has queens, but they're not fit for rule. One of them is a 15-year-old who was turning into a, quote, ripe bitch, unquote. Now how about that? She's not just a bitch, she's a ripe bitch. I never knew that bitches could be in season. The warlords say that they can't help Theron in his estate, but they do suggest somewhere else he can go for a queen. So Theron goes to hell and asks Lord Satan for a queen. You think I'm kidding, but I'm really not. Perhaps, as a lark, Anne Bishop says that there is a realm called Hell, or as is called by its proper name, K-Lear, which is ruled by a man named Satan Demon Sa Diablo. Now, Satan and demon have different spellings than what you're used to, but it's pretty obvious the author is making a fantastical counterpart to, the biblical figure. Hell, or maybe I should call it K-Lear, is another realm apart from the realm of Teriel, where Dina Nihel is. Of that I'm sure, but it's possible they're actually different dimensions, even though the book never explicitly says so. I don't know, the book says that there are portals and winds that people can ride on from one realm to another, so it's possible. Satan is the head honcho, yet it's his son Sadie who rules in his stead. Satan also has another son named Lucifer. Just thought I should mention that. So Theron goes to Satan's estate to beg him for a queen, pulling a favor that Satan owed one of Theron's ancestors, because Satan is really old and stuff. It's here where I learned that Theron is a real pig-headed ass who shows no manners because he fought so long and hard in war. It's also where I learned just how disturbing the story was. Sadie, who remember is the ruler of the realm, is in his bedroom when his wife comes in and sits on the bed. It's time for a sex scene, right? Well, you'd be correct. They talk for a bit as Sadie looks at himself and his wife Janelle in a mirror. And then, once he turns around, he totally loses his shit. I mean it. The narration makes no bones about it. What happens is that Sadie becomes a complete animal. No, I don't mean he shapeshifts into an animal. What I mean is that his rational human mind is suddenly replaced with a completely feral one that runs on base instincts. He looks at his wife, yet he doesn't see his wife. He sees a total stranger instead sitting on his bed. And he thinks to himself, she's on my bed. My bed. What is she doing on my bed? Janelle senses something is wrong. And then Sadie goes to the bed and, they do the twisted tango. Yet, he is extremely rough and ends up bruising her. Which, as I'm sure you're aware of, doesn't make for a very sexy scene in the story. Surely there are consequences, right? Well, sure, Sadie ends up confessing to his father that he hurt Janelle. So his father, freaking Satan, questions Janelle about the incident. If it was rape, then Satan will have no choice but to execute his son. Janelle says it was not, actually, so Sadie gets to keep his head. It's good that there are some consequences, but does this scene make for compelling drama? Absolutely not. So here's the thing. In this fantasy world, there are people who are said to be of the blood, meaning they have magic powers. These people wear jewels that work with their blood to give them these powers, and the color of these jewels indicate the strength of their magic. Sounds cool, but there's a downside. The magic makes these people have feral tendencies, meaning they're prone to acting on their base urges and desires, at least more so than normal people. Because of these feral tendencies, a realm needs a queen instead of a king, because it can't trust a man to rule, because men tend to slip into murderous rages whenever they don't get their way. Suffice to say, situations get awkward in the story, intentionally so, of course. But fortunately, things don't get too rapey, with the sole exception of that bedroom scene with Sadie I just mentioned. Microsoft Word says that rapey is not an actual word, but I don't care, that feels like the right word to use here. Anyway, while the drama with Sadie and Janelle is conveniently going on, a queen is summoned to Satan's estate. Her name is Cassidy, and she's said to have had a court once, but she then got kicked out solely for the reason that she isn't pretty. The narrator says she's gawky and big-boned. I'm sure she's the character who's depicted on the cover, which makes me think that the artist took liberties with her likeness. I would sue the publisher for false advertising, but that would make me a big gaping asshole, so I won't. Theron doesn't like her the instant he lays eyes on her because she isn't pretty. Yet she is bound to him by contract. Thank you, Satan. So Theron leads her back to the Greyhaven estate. A court is set up containing about 12 men, a process that thankfully isn't as boring as it sounds. And so Cassidy becomes the new queen of Dina Nahel. It seems weird to me, especially since I haven't read the previous installments, but Cassidy seems competent enough as a ruler. The problem is that the previous queen there had oppressed the people to the point that the people rebelled. So it will be tough for Cassidy to earn everyone's trust while they wonder if she'll repeat the old queen's mistakes. Well, it turns out that a queen has needs, so she'll be out looking for a consort. There'll be candlelit dinners, sitting by bright fireplaces, playful banter, and gift-giving. Oh, wait, I must be thinking of something else, because none of those things happen in this book. No. Instead, Cassidy leaves behind her shawl at the dinner table, where she had eaten with her court. Theron, the owner of the estate who wasn't happy with how Cassidy looked, picks up the shawl and says, "Well, this is my cue. I guess a man's gonna do what a man's gotta do." Okay, so he doesn't say that last part, but you should catch my meaning. There's no mistake here. Cassidy wants Theron to bring her shawl back to her room so that perhaps she can invite him in and they can do the twisted tango. At this point, Cassidy and Theron are still basically strangers. They don't know each other all that well except for the basics, and yet Theron, as the first escort, is expected to go on and have sex with her, simply because the queen has needs. If this doesn't sound romantic to you, then congratulations, you have some idea of what romance actually is. As it turns out, Cassidy begins her relationship not with Theron, but with his cousin Jared, whom everyone calls Gray. Gray is mentally fragile and immature because he spent years in a jail where he was tortured constantly. He doesn't want to move back into the mansion, but he does stay nearby where he tends to the garden. And what do you know, Cassidy also likes to garden, and so that's where the two meet. For the first half of the book, whenever Cassidy and Gray are together, it's about them tending to the garden. Doesn't sound very exciting, I know, but the author does manage to find ways to keep things interesting. It's not like she simply has the characters talk about gardening tips and whatnot. Actually, there is some interesting drama here, which mostly has to do with Cassidy and Theron. Theron is just an ass since he always disrespects Cassidy and never lets her leave the estate. Cassidy seems to have good reason for being disgusted by him, but her own father tells her that maybe Theron isn't as cruel and imperceptive as she thought. Maybe he really does have her best interests in mind, at least for the moment. This kind of thing is perfectly relatable, so you see, the book does have some good drama, that makes you think about some of the situations in your own life. Too bad it's ruined soon enough. One day, Cassidy has her period, which is perfectly normal. Except it doesn't seem normal because she thinks that her period is going to put her in danger from the men, or as the book calls them, males, in her court. She thinks about staying in her room for the rest of the day, but then she goes out anyway and runs into Theron. Theron speaks normally to her at first, but then he flares his nostrils as if he's sniffing the scent of a good T-bone steak. And suddenly, he's like, "Moonblood! Oh, I smell moonblood! Moonblood!" By the way, I'm paraphrasing here. He then moves toward her, intent on killing her. She sees another member of her court named Talon, and he does the same damn thing. "Moonblood! Arr!" Cassidy makes it outside and runs into Gray, who senses something is wrong and ferrets her inside his humble hovel. She then lies on his bed and goes to sleep under Gray's protection. I mean, no one actually comes looking for her, so Gray doesn't have much to do beside watch over her. So what does Gray do? He leans over and sniffs her neck, because that's perfectly normal behavior for a man of the blood. A man who wears a jewel and grants him magic powers. So let's recap. Theron, who may be an ass but is otherwise a rational human being, loses his shit upon sniffing Cassidy's moonblood. And then another man does the same damn thing, and then another brings her under his protection and sniffs her neck. You know, like a dog or something. The book had me with some compelling drama, it really did. And then it got weird on me. Look, I know that one of the appeals of the fantasy genre is to read about another world where certain rules apply that simply don't exist in the real world. And it's fun and interesting to read about how people operate under these rules that seem so alien. But it's always important to keep the characters relatable and sympathetic. Otherwise, they'll just seem too weird to the reader/viewer. And I, for one, will find it hard to give a damn about them. In this story, I read about how men's tempers can dangerously rise to a, quote, killing edge. Just for losing their tempers? What? And I read about how they want to sniff women's necks, and how they grow completely feral whenever their queen is insulted or when she has her period. And of course, I read about how a fully grown man, a married man, sees his wife as a stranger and acts purely on animal instinct, leading to a very, very uncomfortable sex scene. As I said, this story seems to run on male guilt. Men respond to their urges in animal fashion, and later they feel guilty about it. To the author's credit, it's clear that she doesn't want male readers to feel guilty. Hell, according to the exposition, a queen had oppressed her people, causing them to rebel, so women don't get a free pass in the story. But even so, reading about how human beings give in to animal instinct kind of disgusts me, to be perfectly honest. Because when that happens in real life, bad things occur, to put it lightly. Perhaps Anne Bishop created characters with names like Satan, Lucifer, and Demon to acknowledge that these base instincts are things of the devil, and so giving into them leads to nothing good. Or maybe I'm wrong, since these devilishly named characters really seem like wise and caring people. When they're not losing their shit, of course. Judging from the book's Amazon page, this series certainly has its fans who like reading about this strange world where people's moods can change on a dime. But I'm hesitant to recommend this book just because it's so weird. But hey, maybe you like weird, in which case this book is for you. And then you can decide for yourself if it's too weird or not. If anything, it's not very romantic. Not even with a relationship between Gray and Cassidy. It's mostly drama and suspense, and people going batshit insane. You had me for a while, Anne Bishop, but ultimately the cover illustration lured me in, but the story didn't get me hooked. That about wraps it up for this episode. Thank you for listening, and please keep reading.